Hey HTA and welcome back to Satisfactory. This is my bite-sized run which is aimed at those of you who want to progress through this game without every build taking weeks to complete, but still have an awesome looking factory. And so far I think we've been doing pretty well. It's a pretty basic hub that we've built over here, although I'm not entirely sure if the term basic still applies considering how much stuff we are actually producing here. As you can see, we have pretty much every item we have unlocked in here so far, but of course we are far from done because we are now producing the versatile frameworks and automated wiring we need in order to complete phase 2, but we have some time to kill because we need about 1.5 hours for all of the production to be done from the moment you actually start it up. If you have been building like I have been building, kind of troubleshooting here and there, then you might have already all the materials you need to actually unlock phase 2, but either way you probably have a little time to kill. So let's make sure that once again we put that time to use. So there's a lot of good ways you can actually kill some time in this phase of the game, but as it happens we just got a brand new one to play around with, because as you can see I am currently now on the experimental build on update 7, and the update 7 brought the blueprint designer that you see in front of us here. It's a very nice little tool to play around with, and we're actually going to use it a lot in this episode to kind of see how it works in practice. I've seen a lot of people actually making designs in it already. I just want to use it during an actual game and see how that works. Now, you don't need to follow me to update 7 if you don't want to, and you don't want to risk your save games. If you do, please back up your save games, because it is an experimental branch for a very good reason. Things do tend to break down. I've had several crashes already, and so have others, although there have been steady updates over the last few days already to fix that, but still, experimental is experimental, so do that at your own risk. Now, you don't actually need the update 7 features to follow me along from this point on. I will be basically building anything that you can still build in the normal game as well, or in the update 6 live build that we currently have, but just to make sure this is a little bit more future proof, as well as just having fun playing around with the new stuff, I will be using update 7 from this point on. Now, there is one feature in update 7 that I want to point out just in case you didn't know about it, and that is the update to the awesome sync. So first of all, it looks a lot better, but we also now have a secondary line for DNA points. So basically what that does is you now have a secondary way of getting coupons, and that is by killing creatures, transforming them into these alien DNA capsules, and then putting them in your awesome sync. And each of these capsules actually gives you 1000 points, I believe, and that means that you can get a huge amount of coupons just by killing a few dozen creatures early on in the game. And since these coupons are very valuable, and well, of course you can get a lot of fun stuff for those points, it's very worthwhile to actually set something up just to make sure you can make use of this if you are on the experimental build for update 7. Now, if you are not on update 7 or you don't feel like hunting, then a very good way to spend some time is shopping, of course. And this is a very good moment to spend all of those coupons you have been gathering over the last couple of hours. And I specifically recommend that you go and spend them on pretty much everything in the management tab. Ceiling mounts, if you're on update 7, are going to be awesome, but if you're not, then the wall mounts, as well as the floor holes, as well as pretty much any variant of that for the pipelines, as well as the power outlets, are going to be hugely useful to you just to progress through the game and make your builds look better. When it comes to everything else in the shop, it's really up to you what you like in terms of how you like to build your facilities, what types of looks and feels you like to your facilities in order to what you pick. Because most of these things in here are purely aesthetic, although some things like the different curved foundations are of course of a little bit of practical use as well. I recommend pretty much getting what you actually intend to use. Make sure you don't just buy it just because you have the coupons, because then you might end up wanting something else and not having coupons. I do really like all the different walls, gates, windows, etc. I also really like the pillars as well as the structural frame set. This one is really expensive. It costs 10 coupons, but it has a lot of different things in there. Really fun to play with. I really like the looks of how it looks in terms of the actual real world type of industrial feel to it. The railings are actually pretty good as well. I don't currently have the coupons for that anymore because I spent all of those that I had. But I do recommend that you get the ladder, if anything, because the ladder is just very useful early on to make your builds, especially once you go vertical. Getting around your facility initially while you're still building it can be really annoying. and the factory ladder just makes that a lot easier. You can actually use the ladder as well just to get around the terrain on the map. A lot easier than by jumping or making ramps and things like that, so this is a very easy to justify buy. Now everything else, I also really like the foundations. The default foundations just look really bad, in my opinion. So pretty much get anything else, as well as the same kind of holds for the walls. I really like the concrete and steel walls, so these are a buy that I will always make early in my game, but of course you just pick whatever you think looks good. I do not recommend getting anything like the factory card or the boombox or any of the equipment parts. Well, you could probably get the coffee cup, but anything else I do not recommend getting early on in the game, just because these things are relatively expensive, and well, getting them just because they're fun is of course a pretty good reason to get them, but you might want to spend your coupons elsewhere, and you simply don't get a lot of coupons early on. So think before you spend, basically. A couple of other things that you might spend 10 minutes on or something like that is just getting your actual starting hub into your main facility over here, because this is where you have all your materials now, so it makes sense to have your hub close by, and as well as setting up all the other facilities like a crafting bench, the MAM, as well as an equipment workshop over here as well. And there's one little addition that's actually very simple, just a container, a lift into a merger on top of the line that goes into our sink. And you can use that for the alien DNA material that I just mentioned before to actually get that in there, but this also serves as kind of a dump. So if you have anything in your inventory that you're like, I don't need this anymore, you can just dump it in here and it will go into the sink and not be wasted. And of course you can just delete it from your inventory, but if you're here anyway, it just takes a second to dump it in here, and that just means it didn't go to complete waste. Now, if you still have some time to kill after all of this, then just going around and exploring and getting some of the hard drives or alternative recipes is a very useful way to spend your time as well. Getting some of these slugs that are hiding all across the map. There's one on the ridge over there, as you can see. And in general, just picking up those slugs when you walk around is a very useful way to spend your time. So we are going to be using some of those pretty soon, I believe. So making sure that you just walk around and grab whatever you see is always a good thing. Make sure you check on your doggos every now and then to see if they have anything with you. Give all of your dogs a name if you haven't done so yet. I'm not entirely sure when they added this into the game. I believe this is new, or if it's just on update 7, or I actually just never noticed it before. I'm not sure. Anyway, enough about all of this. If you get all of your materials going, then go to your hub, unlock the phase 2. As you can see, I have already done that, and then we can talk about what to do next. If you have all the materials and you completed phase 2 in your elevators, you should now have access to tier 5 and 6 in your hub. Now, don't forget to grab at the end of tier 4 the FICSIT blueprints, because that will actually give you access to the blueprint designer. But what we want to focus on in this episode is the oil processing in tier 5. Why? Well, we are going to need a lot of plastic and rubber for pretty much everything else after that. You can see plastic in everything else in tier 5. If we look at tier 6, we are going to need some more rubber, we are going to need more plastic and rubber. Basically, we just have to make sure we have a decent amount of plastic and rubber production up and running, so that is where we're going to start. Now, there's actually a little bit of a challenge in this part of the game, because you will probably be running a little bit low on power as well, and it's actually only in tier 6 at the start over here that we get a new way to actually generate power from fuel. So this is basically going to be our liberation in terms of power, because once you have the fuel generator unlocked, life becomes a lot easier. Not to forget, we at the same point we also get Mark IV belts. So basically this is our end goal for the next couple of episodes, because this is going to be huge. Since we're only going to need a pretty small refinery to start out with, I figured why not build it in the blueprint designer so we can copy it on later on. If you're not on update 7, just building it where it actually needs to go is probably going to be just as efficient, because basically I'm going to be building it right here, then copying it and going to the place we're actually going to be building it, and then placing it down over there. And it's not going to be a huge facility, so there's not much time to gain there by using the blueprint designer, but it's new and I want to try it. So I'm going to play around with it. It's going to be a bit of a challenge because we only have a 4x4 foundation area to work with, so wish me luck. Okay, I have to admit, building something in the Blueprint Designer is not as easy as it seems. First of all, what I tried to do was actually build a setup with refineries that I was feeding from the bottom, so with like floor holes and things like that, but the actual refineries didn't fit in, so I could start all the way over. Aside from that, making sure that if you are going to chain together several of these blueprints, that you think about where things are going to be placed. So, for example, I want a 2x2 type of refinery with 2 plastic facilities and 2 rubber facilities, or refineries, I should say. But because these things have 2 inputs and 2 outputs, making sure that actually looks nice is a challenge to begin with, but you also want to make sure that things like the belts align and the spaces between facilities are exactly the same. And that actually takes a lot of thinking up front. So it is a time saver in the long run, but it's actually quite a fun challenge, or not fun challenge, depending on, of course, your preference, to actually build something that will make for actually time efficiency in the long run. Talking difficult, apparently. Okay, so what did I do? I didn't spend a lot of time actually going through the building process with you now because it's a pretty simple facility. We have 2 refineries. We have a belt for the heavy residue that's going to come out, which we can use to make fuel. And we have a belt with some mergers, of course, going into a storage unit, so we have somewhere for all that plastic and rubber to go. Now we're going to make 2 of these designs. We're going to make one for plastic, outputting into a storage unit, and then we're going to make a mirrored version of this that is going to be making the rubber or plastic, or the other one anyway. One thing I love about this already, and this is probably the worst example of this, but still, is that we can include power poles and power lines. I hate setting up power for my facilities, and of course this is just 2 facilities, just not a lot of work, but still, just being able to place this down with all the power already integrated is going to be awesome. And to be honest, you're going to save a lot of time on belts in the long run as well. Now, of course, there's also an input side here. So I've set it up like this with just a very simple belt. Of course, we can't actually connect this to a oil rig or anything like that. So we just have a simple little bit of piping over here that we intend to connect up to something else. Now, I also had to think a little bit about where the outputs were going. So although we have the storage unit on this side, because I know I'm going to make a mirrored version of this with 2 facilities on the left of this one, we have this pipe with the output of the residue kind of leaning towards this side. And because the other facility, once we place this down, is going to be on this left-hand side, there's going to be a reverse pipe going into this direction, and then we can combine that out and have a single pipe with the heavy residue for the fuel refining later on. So that's just, again, a lot of thinking up front about how we're going to design things and making sure that it works. And there we go, we have a second setup, again, trying to make sure it kind of looks the same, although it doesn't exactly look the same because of the placement of these output ports. So, but the basic idea is the same, 2 facilities with a storage unit and a belt, and then a line of heavy residue going out with an input belt on the back. Now, you want to see something really cool. Let's say we were building this and we included something where we're like, I want to change something. Then all we need to do is say load blueprint and then go to the other one, and it will say, hey, let's load that. And then poof, the entire facility is loaded up, so we can change it around if we want to. And that's just really cool, really cool. And I can definitely see how this is going to be awesome in the long run. Anyway, enough talking, let's get going. Make sure you bring a truck full of stuff and an inventory full of stuff as well. So that just means if you go by truck, you can bring the double amount, actually a little bit more than that in terms of the amount of items you can carry, and you just don't want to have to go back for a few bars of concrete or whatever that you need to finish your facility. So just make sure when you grab your truck, you load it up to the brim with all the items that you're going to need to make a build. Specifically, bring a lot of things like steel, concrete. Those are things that tend to run out really fast if you're not careful, and bring a little bit of all the complex items as well. Now, our destination for today are these oil nodes on the islands on the, what is this? West coast of the map. Now, in order to actually get to these islands, depending on, of course, where you cross, you're going to need some form of a bridge because the vehicles can't actually traverse this. And while I was starting to build this bridge, I was like, isn't this a very good thing to try and use the blueprint designer on? So let's see if we can make something interesting to make building a bridge a lot easier and faster. Well, luckily, the blueprint designer itself doesn't cost a lot of resources, so I figured why not plop one down and start figuring out with it. Now, I don't want to overcomplicate things like bridges at this point in the game. Once again, we want it to be bite-sized, and I don't want you to spend an entire evening building a bridge. So if I would be building a bridge normally, I would keep it pretty simple, but make it look good. And a very easy way to do that is use something else that is not a standard foundation, so something like the asphalt, for example, like I have over here. Something with pillars, and then the frameworks actually make for a very nice looking way to make a kind of like a framework across a bridge as well. And then having a pattern just repeat every few foundations is typically something that looks extremely organized and clean and is not too complicated to build if you don't want to spend too much time on that. Now, thankfully, using a blueprint designer makes that even easier as long as we keep in mind that this is a repeating thing. So that means that if we have a pillar over here and we make a pillar over here as well, if we place it down, we have two pillars like next to each other. So we want to make sure we stop building at the point where the next pillar is going to be. And I think that should work just fine if we do it something like this. If you're wondering about this pattern, as you can see, these are overlapping frame pillars, and you build that by just placing it down initially like this, and then, well, actually it needs to be on the next foundation because remember it's going to be repeating like this, and then you build the framework on top of that, and then you simply delete the pillar once again, and then that way you can have these two overlapping very easily. Now I'm gonna load this up as a blueprint and then see if we can make it a lot easier to build a bridge. Well, the blueprint mode is definitely not finalized yet because I'm having a pretty hard time getting it to snap where I want. So I have the start of the bridge over here, which is 3 foundations wide. I have the blueprint over here, but it's not actually snapping onto the foundations that we have. So I can either build it on top of foundations very easily. As you can see, it is moving on top of the foundations, just clicking into that. But it won't snap to the foundations that already exist over there. And if I place it like it is now, it's going to be slightly underwater, and that's not what we want with a bridge. So this is definitely a little bit of a challenge with the blueprint system for now. What I think I have to do is probably build a foundation just below this one, and then we can place this on top, and then it should work. Okay, so it takes a little bit to get it going, but once you do, it's actually pretty awesome. So although it wasn't actually snapping to the foundations I had in place, if you start building blueprints and you put it to build mode blueprint, it will actually snap to other blueprints. So as you can see, we can now just say, we're going to be building a little bridge over here and place down a lot of these things. And as you can see now, the snapping works just perfectly. We have a nice repeating pattern because we put some thought into that, and you can build a bridge like this in no time once you make the basic design. So awesome stuff. You do have to spend a little bit of time at the entry and exit point of the actual bridge to make sure the pattern kind of fits in nicely with the end of the bridge and doesn't interfere with the things that are on the other side. But other than that, it's pretty awesome. And once you finish your bridge, it's time to grab your explosives and go blow up some of these creatures over here, because as far as I know, the only way you can actually take care of them is like this. There's actually some slugs over here as well, and to be honest, just blowing them all up is extremely satisfying. And then you want to head out to the west side of the island where there is a single pure oil node. Once you get there, you want to build a oil extractor, of course, over there. And I think I want to have the refinery in the center of the island, just because it's cool. There's a little hill on there as well. And I think it's going to be cool to have the actual refinery, kind of like you have those oil platforms, but not out on sea, but we're just going to be building that on top of the island, but in a similar fashion. I envision this island area to actually have a couple of 5, 6, 7, something like that of these facilities at some point as we expand our production more and more. And I think it will look really cool from that point on, but let's just start with one to begin with. Now, in order to place down a blueprint, it's actually really hard to see where it needs to fit. We have a blueprint that's 4 by 3, no, sorry, 4 by 4 actually, because it's a blueprint. So I think we'll need to make sure that we leave some empty rooms in this starting foundation, and that will make it a little easier to see if we're actually putting it on the correct place. Now we do need to rotate this actually, because we need the back end this way. There we go. And like this, it should be positioned right where it needs to go. And as you can see, once you have your blueprint, it's really easy to set it up. We already built this in the blueprint designer, so it's not like we're cheating or anything like that. We're just making it easier to make sure we can make the same facility multiple times over. Placing down our second blueprint along with a pipeline makes for a very decent looking build, I think. So I added in some pillars. I cleaned up the temporary foundation that I had my tower on. I added in a ladder. Once again, I do recommend that you get the ladder as one of the first things that you unlock, just because it makes it so much easier. And I don't really like how ramps look, and I don't really like how stairs look. So that's just me. By all means, feel free to use something else. But I actually kind of like the style of the ladder in builds with a lot of concrete. So I think this looks pretty cool. It fits into the landscape, is something I think is important, and it's a very simple and clean build. We have 2 facilities, 2 making rubber and 2 making plastic, each going their own storage facility. We have all the piping set up. We have a pipeline towards this facility. Depends a little bit on your preference whether or not you like the corners being on foundations or not. I'm not entirely sure. I've decided myself what I actually like. But for now, I'll just leave it as this is. Actually, I'm really tempted to get out the foundations at some point. But in the end, what I want to do, once, like I just said, is have several of these facilities all around. So at that point, I will probably just pave the entire island in foundations anyway. Now, we're not quite done, because although we do have plastic and rubber production now, if we don't do anything with this residue, then we are not going to have this facility working for very long. So I think it makes sense to have kind of a fuel facility maybe down here, so that we can extract the plastic and rubber from the sides with a truck station at some point, and then have another station in front of here, supplying fuel to the truck stations as well as fuel to wherever else it needs to go. So let's set that up very simple. So I think that should look something like this. A very simple outgoing pipeline over here. I of course combined the 2 different sections of the pipeline into a single pipeline over here, down the middle, and into a single refinery making fuel. We only need 1. That should be more than sufficient to handle all the residue coming out from these other 4 refineries. The problem is that fuel has nowhere to go. We can't burn it yet because we don't have the fuel generator unlocked just yet. We can't actually package it yet because we have to unlock that. And basically, we have nothing to do with all that fuel. So that's where there are 4 fluid buffers coming in, and that's where we can stock up some of that. It's probably going to be filling up quite quickly, so we might actually need to come back at some point to flush this system. That's not going to be a problem, because we have a second problem we're going to need to fix, and that is the power. Because of course, none of these facilities are actually going to do anything without power. I don't want to draw a power line from all the way from the other side of the map. So I'm just going to set up some simple power facility over here with a decent amount of megawatts, so it shouldn't turn off too quickly. We don't need it to function indefinitely just yet. We are of course going to make sure that happens at some point, but for now we're just going to be efficient and set up a facility that just gets us to where we need to go. And since we cut down a lot of trees and leaves anyway to make room for this facility, I figured why not just use biofuel to get things started to begin with. Now the cool thing about this is that this is just a single blueprint once again. Placing this down only took a minute. Actually building it didn't take that long either, but if I ever want some more biofuel power to supplement my already existing power, now I can just slap it down really quickly. It comes with all these power poles and power lines attached. Again, I hate power lines, so this makes my life a lot easier, and then just hooking it up to the entire system means it's good to go. Now, I actually only need to fill it up with some biofuel, and that's where this little constructor unit is intended for. It's nice and tight in the middle, and just making some biofuel is really easy. I don't actually recommend making solid biofuel, just transform your leaves and wood that you gather from actually clearing out the area into biomass. That will burn a lot longer than the normal leaves and wood, and it's actually a kind of annoying to make the solid biofuel because it just takes so long. If you look at the recipe, making this is almost instant, as you can see, but making solid biofuel actually does take quite a bit of time. So don't do this, just stick with the normal biofuel to begin with. Okay, and there you have it. We have the oil coming in. I have everything powered up. Let's see if this pump is actually doing anything. It should turn on in just a second. There we go. And that should mean we now have something pumping up oil. Yep, you can see it opening up right there. That means it should be opening up here any second now. It takes a little while for these things to actually flow through. Is it working? Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Oof, I was worried there for a moment. Okay. And let's jump up. We should see it coming in over here as well. Maybe, yes, no, yes. Hello? Yep. This is moving, so that should work just fine. This one is moving. And then hopefully, we should be seeing some outputs coming out over here as well. Ooh, let's see. Let's go to the top. Yep, we have plastic. Do we have rubber as well? Do we have rubber? Rubber? Yes, we have rubber. Okay, nice. So all of that is working. That means we should now also see some residue coming out. And that should mean that this fuel facility over here should start working at any moment as well. Well, assuming I, of course, actually set up the recipe. There we go. And yep, we have heavy oil residue coming in as well. So that means we are now going to start producing fuel. And there you have it, guys. This is a pretty decent looking facility, I think. We have plastic, rubber, fuel, some power, and of course we do have temporary power, so that's something we're going to fix, I think, in the next episode probably, just to make sure we have a stable power flow coming in, because we are getting to the part of the game where we're going to have to construct a lot more complex things. This is actually the last simple thing that we can actually construct. But I had a lot of fun building this thing with blueprints. Of course, in the end, the two top areas over here, as well as this, is all blueprints, supplemented with some manual work as well. I'm loving the new blueprint system, just because it's not just make one large blueprint, slip everything down. I mean, I can imagine wanting to kind of copy this entire facility and being able to place that down. And I get why the designers actually opted not to go that route. And I think this is a very nice middle ground. So let me know in the comments what you think about that, because I can imagine there's a lot of people with very different opinions about that. So let me know. And make sure, if you're still here, that you like and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. And I hope to see you in the next one.